Hello, everyone. My name is Abby, and today we are starting the first episode of a new series of Gregtech New Horizon. The sun rises quite brightly on this first episode as we take another stab at the hardest Minecraft mod pack of all time. Let's go. I have played Gregtech New Horizons on multiple occasions, and I have recorded it on multiple occasions as well. The last major time I played it was while I was doing my Gregtech New Horizons hardcore attempts about 2 years ago. This is not going to be a hardcore. This is going to be something else entirely. This is going to be effectively highly edited videos showcasing me playing Gregtech New Horizons. This first episode is going to be pretty simple, doing all the basic setup, all the, a peachery of getting tinker's tools, getting a coke oven, and setting up a steam boiler. That being said, this first little bit is just getting quests out of the way. Some of the first ones, like getting dirt, getting wood, getting gravel. My first goal in mind immediately when playing the pack was just get to a village. You're gonna see why I want to get to a village soon, but that was the goal. That was what I was trying to find, and that's why I spent the next couple minutes just adventuring around the world. With a little bit of luck, we ended up finding a Coven Witch's cabin, basically right off the bat. They can have some good things like bread or fish, and the Coven Witches themselves are useful witchery. This one had an iron shovel, which was entirely useless. So, great find! These first few clips, by the way, are recorded without sound. The sound capture didn't work entirely when I was doing this the first time, but about halfway through the video, that should end up being fixed. Here I was gathering some berries. Along my way of trying to find a village, I was collecting just about every crop bush that I could. And once I ended up finding a gravel patch, I ended up digging that out too. Just collecting some menial little things here. Across the way of the lake, I ended up seeing a railcraft house. This is good. It means I'll have a bed, a furnace, and a crafting table on the first night. I should also mention the version of Gregtech New Horizons that I am playing. I am playing on version 2.7.0 Beta 3. There's a lot of new things in this version, a lot of things that I had never even seen before. This part, however, is standard. You just dig out a bunch of gravel. Got about 40 of it from this little patch. Didn't want to get too heavy into it, but you need it for all the flint, don't you? I end up making a bit of a mistake here. You're given about 10 brevity points of hunger. And that cake, each individual slice of cake, counts as one of those brevity points. So I basically just wasted a bunch of my hunger. That kind of comes to bite me back later, but it didn't really bite back hard, and you won't see any of it. It just made the food gathering a little bit more difficult. I checked this chest. There wasn't much that was too useful in it. I steal the bed, and I start getting to crafting some of the regular old components for some flasks. I crafted a flint pickaxe to end up collecting both the furnace and the crafting table so I can use them for later. And the thing is that the early game of Gregtech New Horizons is largely identical, no matter how you play it. That's why I wanted to get a village. The village allows me to speed up my way through the early game quite a decent amount. So that's always why I end up looking for it. But it took me a little bit to find it, so this railcraft house definitely sufficed for allowing me to get my bearings straight before I really head off and properly start looking for a village. That's why I ended up sleeping and skipping my first night on this planet. Food is a very important part of Dragtech New Horizons. There's a lot of different foods in it, and food also increases the amount of hearts that you have. We'll get into this more later. What you're gonna definitely know for now is that I wanted a variety of food. And with 2.7.0 Beta 3, it also adds the nutrition mod. So a lot of gardening collecting had to be done. So you can see me here just wandering around the countryside, taking a bit of logs, and taking any of the gardens that I end up coming across. just looking out on the map just in case there ends up being a village somewhere, or just anything interesting at all. Unfortunately, the most useful thing I end up finding is another railcraft house. These things are pretty useful. They're very useful for getting the brick dust for primitive blast furnace because bricks are a bit of a pain in the neck to craft. But altogether, it wasn't that great of a find. I was glad to get a few more items, but really it was just a little bit annoying that I couldn't find what I was looking for. I thought that was all I was going to find, but as dusk began to fall, I ended up finding another witch's covenant's house. I decided to look, and there was two spruce saplings. Well, there goes my luck. Well, not helpful, and in fact, actively hostile to what I was attempting to do, I did end up finding a group of crimson cultists lying around in the forest. They were not something I wanted to deal with at the moment, but I was going to keep them in mind for later. I definitely need their cult books. After a bit more raucous exploring, I end up finally stumbling upon a village. This, in all retrospect, didn't take too long. It only took about 2 in-game days, so I was quite happy with the results. Really, all I was looking for here was a tinker's house, a crop field, and maybe a tinker's smeltery. Altogether, I only got 2 out of those 3 things, not the smeltery, but that was the part I cared about the least. I mostly just wanted the crops and the tinker's tables. Altogether, a good enough find. I ended up digging my way into one of the tinker's houses and starting setting up my modus operandi here. I was going to be here for a little bit, basically just to make my tinker's tools, but I mean, might as well make it cozy while I'm at it. The first goal was just crafting all the different flint tools, the flint axe, the flint shovel, the flint hoe, all the hoo-ha. The basic gist was that I was just getting a bunch of quests done. That's really all I had to do here for the next few minutes. Just craft some items, get the quests finished, and eventually get to the point where I can start working on the Stone Age chapter. This basics chapter is a little bit boring and there's nothing super interesting through it. So that's all we had to do. Just get a few things done and eventually end up catching up to where I actually am in terms of quest progression. I clear out a quest that was meant for killing sheep, and I start looking up on the mountain where I see a patch of ore. I decide, might as well mark that off on the map. Might as well see what was there. And as I end up climbing it, I end up seeing that it is a vermiculite vein. This is pretty interesting. It's a neat enough find, and it's not a vein that you find terribly often. So I guess I'm happy with it. I start mining down cobblestone for another quest and dig out a whole little alcove underneath the blacksmith for no other reason than just gathering cobblestone. A lot of the quests in the early game are just boring, busy work and menial labor, but they do have some nice rewards, namely in terms of the food aspect, and I do want to be up to date on the quests for later because some of the quest rewards do get pretty snazzy. With the cobblestone made, it is a pretty simple few crafts just to get the bed and get out of the first chapter, at least in terms of the major quest. I make the stuff for the soft hammer right now, making the sticks and the planks, and the bed comes not too long after. In fact, the bed comes immediately after because it's just a retrieval task. With that, tier 0 is done. Time for tier 0.5, surprisingly enough. Tier 0.5 starts with us attempting to gather a bunch of gravel, sand, and clay. So, that's exactly what we end up doing. With the gatherings finished, it is now time for us to start working on the little bit of a tree that's required to make the Tinker's tools. Really, I can already make the Tinker's tools because I found the Tinker's tables from village houses. But getting the Tinker's tools quests completed is also nice. So that's what I end up doing here. I make myself a clay bucket so I can carry water around. That water is then able to be turned into paper, and that paper is able to be turned into blank patterns, which end up becoming the constitute components for Tinker's tools. Really, it's a quite simple crafting tree, but it just takes a bit of time to get to and through. At this point I was starting to make the paper with the wood pulp and the water that I got. And with the paper, yeah, that allows us to really finish the whole thing off. What I didn't anticipate was that the Tinker's tables are a crafting task and not a retrieval task. So I actually couldn't complete it. Yeah. I end up just deciding to cheat myself in the completion of that quest. So, oops. Now I end up looking in all the Tinker houses throughout the village, looking to see whatever parts they have, in case I can scrounge anything that's terribly useful, and also all the individual different patterns. I don't find anything that's terribly useful. I find some flint components that I can use. The most interesting thing I find, though, is an obsidian binding. You see, the thing about the obsidian binding is that it is reinforced 3 on base. In this version of Tinker's Construct, if you have reinforced 10, your tool is unbreakable. So reinforced 3 basically just gives me a head start on getting reinforced 10. And already it has a 30% chance of not breaking when I mine a block. So that's nice. But either way, I end up making the tools, just getting all the components all set up. And finally, we can end up having our first breath of Tinker tools. The sweet, sweet look of Tinker's Construct right in our grasp. Oh, nice. And with that finished, I can now start tearing down the town. I want to terraform this town so that's a little bit nicer and more conditional for what I want to build. The main thing I want to build right now is cows, because cows are useful. So I build a little pen and I start luring them in with a bit of wheat. With just a little bit of force and a bit of time, it ends up working without any trouble. Other than, of course, 1.7.10 mob pathing being a pain in the ass. But they come in and we got milk. That's all. I decide instead of living in a little hunky shack outside of the town, I decide to live in the castle that they have. So I place some chests, I place my table in there, and I end up moving all my components. Now I start looking towards the coke oven. It's just clay and sand. It's nothing too terribly difficult to craft. So that is my next goal. Get enough clay and sand to make a coke oven and start making charcoal for torches. So here comes another montage. With a sufficient amount of sand and clay gathered, it's time to start working on making the coke oven bricks. I end up accidentally shift clicking out my coke oven bricks and making about a stack more than I intended on making. So that's my problem. But that's fine. We'll end up making more coke ovens anyway. I put them all in the furnaces, smelt them all up, and we end up making ourselves a coke oven in pretty much no time. The main advantage that having a coke oven has is that I can get charcoal and creosote. These are two much better sources of fuel than what I was using previously, which was just bog standard wood planks. And also, charcoal is kind of required next in progression. In terms of what it actually gets me, well, the creosote is pretty handy as a fuel source, and also it can be used to make a bunch of torches at once. And that's a thing that I end up using a little bit later. I decided to place it in this corner, mostly because I think it's the best that would fit, and throw in a stack of logs to get it just immediately cooking on the charcoal. And with that, that's all I wanted to get done. But I decided to do just a little bit more. The first little bit more that I wanted to do was some terraforming. I didn't like how the village looked. I wanted to make it look my own way, and that's what I ended up doing for the next little bit. Tearing down some houses, building up some bridges, and also getting my first death, where I ran into a brute skeleton and my sword broke halfway through fighting him. I did not have the right plan and ended up dying, mostly because I was being really dumb. Yeah. With my death out of the way, I decided to get back to more of the terraforming. It really isn't anything terribly interesting. I just tore down houses for the wood and covered it up with some dirt, just to make sure it didn't look too terrible while I was walking over it. The main thing I wanted to terraform around here for was to make better farms, and namely this cotton farm that I ended up putting in. I wanted to put it into a place that was a bit better and a bit more full, so that came my plan about. The first step in making that new cotton farm was, of course, tearing out the old one, breaking all the blocks that were involved in it, and then just building a new one right outside of where my pen. I ended up getting pretty close to where my cows were, but it wasn't really a concern, and I now just had a full 9x9 cotton plot. It was much better than the maybe 7x7 one I had. The next goal was for me to find more ore veins. I found that for MacLeod vein earlier, I wanted to start looking for more Gregtech ore veins. So that's where my next bulk of time went. Gregtech ore veins spawn differently than ores in most other maps, and what it is that every 3 chunks, there is a massive ore vein that spawns deep underground. So basically, that's kind of just what I did. Every 3 chunks, I dig a ladder all the way down to bedrock, or more correctly, all the way down to the ore vein until I end up finding it. This first one, very luckily, was brown limonite, or basically just iron. I mined my first bit, and I noticed that it was not brown limonite ore, it was raw brown limonite ore. It seems the newest version of Gregtech New Horizons has a totally different form of ore processing that I had no idea of beforehand and is a lot more similar to 1.16 ore processing, which came as a bit of a surprise. But it really wasn't anything big, and it was the same either way, so I just started mining out the whole brown limonite vein, as much as I could at least. After mining in the brown limonite vein, I ended up having enough cobblestone to get an iron pickaxe and iron axe set to level up my tool levels. after breeding the cows, I ended up smelting the brown lamb to give myself just a bit more iron. And this iron then I could use to repair my iron pickaxe head to allow me to go further down and dig out more ores and ore veins. And that's exactly what I did. I kept looking for more veins. The first vein I found, however, wasn't an ore vein. It was just a bunch of lava. And it's where I got my second death. Which, yeah, not exactly the greatest display of strength on my part. My next bit of mining did bore a bit more fruit. In order, I found a diamond vein, a lazurite vein, and then eventually 2 manganese veins. The manganese veins are especially interesting because those are usually pretty rare, so I consider myself pretty lucky that I ended up finding them. They're not very useful right now, but they will become very, very useful much later on. Well, not an ore vein in the traditional sense, or not necessarily an ore vein, I did find an apatite vein that was close to a loot games dungeon. I really like the loot games in Gregtech New Horizons, and this was pretty interesting. I, however, did not have the right mining level to be able to break into the loot game, so we'd have to save that for a bit later. The next lucky find was a redstone vein. I'm looking for mostly a copper and tin vein now at this point. I had iron and redstone secured, so if I could find a copper and tin vein, that would be nice. But I didn't focus on that right now. I just focused on making tools in this. I just wanted the tools mostly so I could get some buckets properly. Get myself a bit more fortified into the, I guess, middle game of Gregtech New Horizons. The recipes themselves for the tools aren't terribly expensive. It's just a lot of micro crafting, and that ends up being a big part of Gregtech New Horizons. But it ended up going through a decent amount of iron splat, which was a little concerning, but I had plenty of iron veins that I ended up finding, so I didn't think too much of it. The next thing I ended up doing afterwards was building a proper place for my farms. And for a proper place for my farms, I decided to do it underground. That took a little bit of digging, and all that digging just to dig out a huge space that I would end up putting my farms in. The first one I wanted to place down was a wheat farm, because wheat is very useful, but eventually I'd have all my farms down here. After a little bit of planting, I ended up finding a copper vein, but it's not in the place I wanted it to be. I ended up accidentally finding a copper vein that was right next to my farm. The issue is that it was high up and also underwater, so I didn't really trust it to have any good accessible copper. I ended up vowing myself to find a copper vein in a different, more accessible area, and went back to digging. I ended up digging out another plot for crops. This one for different crops like lettuce, tomatoes, onions, and carrots. After vowing myself to find another copper vein, I went digging again and ended up finding another copper vein. I looked around it for a minute, and I ended up noticing something that was rather bad about it. You see, Gregtech ore veins spawn in kind of 3 layers. A top layer, a middle layer, and a bottom layer. For a chalcopyrite vein, the top layer is the copper. The top layer is the one you want. The middle layer is pyrite, and the bottom layer is iron. Both pyrite and iron are good, but I already had iron veins, so I needed to find copper. What I noticed here is that this copper vein didn't have a chalcopyrite top layer. Its top layer seemed to be the pyrite. This means it seems like the gravel ended up actually intersecting out of the chalcopyrite vein. So this was effectively a copper vein with no copper in it, or a very small amount of copper in it. I decided to cut my losses and found myself to find another copper vein, one that was more accessible and more easily mineable. I did end up getting a lucky break though. After a little bit of mining, I ended up finding a cassiterite vein. This meant that I had a good source of tin. I also ended up mining a decent amount of that vein. Just getting enough cassiterite so I could really start getting into things proper with tin. I ended up needing tin and copper to make bronze. This bronze is then used for a lot of the steam stuff. So that was my main goal for the next period of time. After mining down a little bit more, I ended up finding another loot games. This is really lucky. They are pretty rare. After such a long period of time, I finally found an actually accessible chalcopyrite vein that I could use. I was very happy and ended up spending the next night mining out basically all the chalcopyrite I could. With the copper vein cleared, I ended up taking a look at my map and seeing all of the ore veins that I had found. I had looked quite many places to find this copper vein, but it had all been worth it. They're all very useful veins, and I'll end up using them all eventually. But with copper made, it's now time to get to bronze. It's a relatively trivial process. I had to smelt up copper and tin, and I decided to smelt a little bit more iron. Well, normally the ratio is 3 copper, 1 tin to 4 bronze. In this case, the ratio is 3 copper, 1 tin to 3 bronze, at least when crafting it by hand. That made it a little bit less efficient, but it's really not such a concern. The Gregtech ore veins have so many ores in it that you can get hundreds of ores just from a single vein, and you can find veins pretty easily. So I wasn't really concerned about the cost, but eventually we would switch to using much better methods. I collected the bits of copper and tin that we had from the forges and started getting to work on making the small steam coal boiler. Once we got the raw bronze dust, it was also evidently something that we had to smelt. This bronze dust would then turn to bronze ingots, which we then turn to bronze plates. Finally, I could start turning my attention to the small steam coal boiler. It was pretty easy. All it takes is an iron furnace, some bricks, and some bronze plates. Nothing that I can't get. The bronze plates are especially easy because I have them right now. I just made 48 bronze. I can make 5 bronze plates, no trouble. The other parts were a little bit more difficult. The iron furnace takes 7 iron plates, 1 furnace, and just a bit of wrenchery. The bricks were slightly annoying, but this was solely because for some reason you need water to meld bricks together in this pack, and I really don't get why. But with the bricks and the furnace and the plates made, there's really nothing else. And just putting it all together, the small steam coal boiler was made. That is technically the start of the steam age. Right there, right now. Of course, just because we made the small steam coal boiler doesn't mean we can start the steam age right here, right now. We're gonna have to wait a little bit for that. Regardless, it is a good achievement, and it is the first major goal in the pack. We're done with Tier 0 and Tier 0.5. But Tier 1 will have to wait for the next episode. There's a bit more foundational things I'd like to do before I get properly into that. Namely, make a water tank and expand on the props. That will have to wait for the next episode, though. I hope you all enjoyed. If you liked, please leave a like. If you want to, leave a comment below. And follow my socials if you'd like. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.